have an idea on how to be an effective member and communicator when it comes to communicating with a group. In this context, groups are meant to build personal relationships with almost everyone. But in the context of organizations, the challenge is you may not fully know everyone, especially if the organization is big and yet you still share the same values and culture. That is why organizational communication focuses on building relationships and interacting with not only with members or your superiors, but also to the world outside of your organization. In this lecture, we will try to understand how organizational communication works, the types and characteristics of organizations, communication networks in an organization, and organizational climate. But first, we need to understand the nature of organizational communication. There are two perspectives on how we can look at organizations. First is that we can look at how people communicate within organizations. Another perspective is to see communication as organization, or when organizations are formed as a result of communication. Krebs' definition of an organization is more inclined to the second perspective, where organizations are social collectives in which people develop ritualized patterns of interaction in an attempt to coordinate their activities and efforts in the ongoing accomplishment of personal and group goals. But what makes up an organization? Miller defined 5 critical features of an organization, namely the existence of a social collectivity, organizational and individual goals, coordinated activity, organizational structure, and the embedding of the organization with an environment of other organizations. These characteristics may be seen in a group, but the difference is that organizations are more structured than groups, as structure is needed to maintain harmony and create order in organizations. Organizational communication has different functions. Organizations can provide information to members so they can fulfill their responsibilities effectively and efficiently. Organizations can also regulate policies, messages, or interactions within the organization. Organizational communicators may also be focused on coordinating tasks, assigning roles, or coordinating with groups or teams in an organization. Communicators are also focused on getting personnel to do what is needed or manage the organization through effective communication. Of course, organizational communication is also used to persuade or influence members to do a particular task or make a particular decision rather than giving out orders. And finally, organizational communication is meant to make members grow in the organization. This function is often neglected, resulting to dissatisfaction in the organization or lower productivity, or members who just leave the organization. We can learn more about organizational dynamics by looking at the 3 main characteristics of an organization: structure, goals, and people. An organizational structure consists of an external environment who are stakeholders or resources that can make an impact on the organization but exist outside the boundaries of the organization. An input where resources from the external environment are brought to the organization in order to accomplish the goals of the organization. A throughput, which is the rate of delivery of a product or service within the given period of time. And an output, which is the product or service that the organization disseminates back to the external environment. Organizational goals also come in different characteristics. Adaptation goals are designed to make the organization adapt to the external environment instead of becoming too focused on its own products. Management goals are meant to define who will or who can manage or run the organization. These goals define power relations in an organization and at the same time set guidelines on how to manage interactions and conflict in an organization. There are also motivational goals which ensure that members of an organization will be satisfied with their membership and their responsibilities in the organization. Once they remain satisfied, they will remain loyal to the organization and will remain productive as a member. Finally, positional goals attempt to position an organization within the environment in comparison to other organizations within the same market. Here, quality and quantity are the defining factors of organizations. People is the core component of organization. Without people, there would be no organization. But to build an organization, people should be interdependent, meaning that people within an organization are dependent upon one another to achieve the organization's goals. Interactions are also important in an organization because that will help us define and create an org. Organizations are also inherently entities that must control the behavior of its members, while members generally strive for their own sets of needs. And finally, organizations need leaders. Leadership is important in setting the direction of the organization and making the organization more productive and effective. So, what are some types of organizations? In this lecture, we will discuss 4 types: mutual benefit associations, business concern organizations, service organizations, and commonweal organizations. Mutual benefit associations are focused on providing for its membership. Examples of these organizations include political parties, unions, clubs, professional associations, and religious sects. Business concerns organizations are focused on achieving maximum gain at minimum cost in order to further survive and grow in competition with other organizations. Oftentimes, these orgs are cold and callous in how they treat their members. Service orgs are meant to serve their target clients. Common examples of these include hospitals and social work organizations. And finally, commonweal organizations are similar to service orgs, but they are controlled by the public and is meant to serve the public. These orgs are government offices and departments where they serve the public at large. Identifying the type of organization we belong to will help us understand of how communication works in the organization. Speaking of communication, members in an organization communicate formally and informally. Formal communication consists of the rules and norms established by an organization for communicative behavior and were delivered in 3 directions: downward, upward, and horizontal or lateral. In downward communication, messages start up the top of the hierarchy and are transmitted down the hierarchy until it gets to the bottom. Those in the lower hierarchy will follow because of the power and authority established in the org. Examples of downward communication include job instructions or job rationales, memos, procedures and practices, which includes policies and benefits, feedback from supervisors, and employee indoctrination. Although downward communication maintains power and authority in organizations, it poses problems related to the adequacy of information. Sometimes subordinates are not provided enough information. Sometimes subordinates can be overwhelmed with the number of messages that are being received. Communication can also be upward. Upward communication allows management to ascertain success of previously relayed. Downward communication allows individuals from the bottom of the hierarchy to have a voice in policies and procedures, allows subordinates to voice suggestions and opinions to make working environment better, and allows management to test how subordinates will react to new policies and procedures. Usually, upward communication is used to provide information about people, which includes the self, subordinate, co-workers, as well as issues pertaining to people. Upward communication is also used to assess or evaluate organizational procedures and practices and the tasks at hand. We need upward communication because this signifies the transparency of an organization and how the organization treats its members. When there is employee silence or the intentional or unintentional withholding of information of the members, it implies that the organization is not willing to be transformed and that members are more likely to be dissatisfied with the organization. Another problem of upward communication is the distortion or filtering of messages or information. This also has to do with employee silence and how supervisors accept the information received from their subordinates. Horizontal or lateral communication occurs when individuals who have roughly the same status interact with one another in an organization. This direction of communication often focuses on employee satisfaction and improving the morale of the members. Because members are in the same status, they can be more open with each other and share and identify their problems and experiences with each other. If downward communication is focused on asserting power and procedures, and upward communication is focused on assessment and evaluation, horizontal or lateral communication is focused on task coordination, problem solving, sharing of information, and conflict resolution. However, one problem it poses is the lack of reward structure, which is more commonly present in upward and downward communication. Now we go to informal communication. Formal communication is defined as communication that exists within the structure of the organizational hierarchy. So, when we explore informal communication, we explore interactions that are beyond the structure or happens outside the structure. Informational communication is also called grapevine communication or water cooler communication. There are 4 types of informal communication, in which we call chains. The first type is the single strand chain. In this chain, one person transfers a message to the second that forwards the same to the third person, and so on. This makes an endless communication chain. The next type is the gossip chain, in which an individual transfers a message to everybody that they meet, and everybody can transfer the message further to others. The third type is the probability chain, in which members who disseminate information have one individual as primary source of the message who randomly selects people within the communication network to communicate the message. And finally, we have the cluster chain. In the case of cluster network, the source of the message chooses a number of pre-selected people with whom to communicate a message. Now that we have an idea on different communication networks in an organization, let us now go to some types of organizational climate. Organizational climate is an environment which has a strong influence on the action and performance of the members of an organization. In a dehumanizing climate, there is little communication between the supervisor and the subordinate, or there is an imbalance of downward communication compared to upward communication. In this environment, communication among subordinates is not allowed or encouraged. Although this climate solidifies the hierarchy, power, and authority in an organization, it keeps the members separated from each other as the system prevents them from socializing. This will later lead to distrust, distortions, dislike, and lower productivity. In a happiness for lunch bunch climate, the people are the most important. This climate is most likely concerned with employee welfare and peer communication. However, it spends little time concerning about change or communication between the supervisor and employee. Although there is a large amount of time being spent to improve the employee's environment and welfare, it often leads to little time being spent on doing tasks, which sometimes lead to neglect of the quality and quantity of the products or services produced by the members. In an open climate, the personnel are encouraged to do their jobs but with assistance from the supervisor. In this climate, the personnel are encouraged to talk to each other and create balance in all directions of communication. This climate also creates openness to new ideas and change. Because of this, people will be more comfortable to express their opinions, be more straightforward, and be more constructive when it comes to criticism. When members are encouraged and the organization is more transparent and open, there is growth not only to members, but to the whole organization as well. Our goal is not just to be better at communicating with other people, but also to have the ability to assess every situation, every environment, and every direction of our communication. Should we become leaders in the future, I hope that we must strive to be transformational and make our organization be more open to change and have a safe and empowering space for all members.